Explosives are ruled out as a cause of this crash. Metallurgist Terry Heaslip has been brought in. He examines the plane's reconstructed tail and makes a startling observation. Pieces of the plane's skin show evidence of damage from overheating.
Which means that it was flexing. And you take a coat hanger and you go like that, back and forth. If you hold it close to where it's going to break, you'll burn your hand because you develop heat where you're doing the fatiguing. It's the same thing on an airplane.
The evidence is pointing to a problem with the plane's tail. Investigators are keen to look at a massive generator recovered from the rear of the aircraft. The auxiliary power unit is housed inside the Convair's rear fin. It's a backup power generator that's usually only used while the plane is on the ground. Heimdall inspects the device and discovers that some melted plastic parts from the plane's cabin have found their way inside the APU's turbine. It gives him an important new piece of information about what was happening on the plane at the moment it failed.
Meaning that the cabin had failed when the APU was still operating.
The APU should not have been running while the plane was in the air. The fact that it was means the APU could be behind this crash. Investigators try to learn more about what happened on the day of the crash. They interview the mechanic who inspected the plane that morning. He reports that one of the plane's two main generators wasn't working, and that he wasn't able to repair it. Regulations demand that the plane have two sources of power before it's allowed to take off. The first officer comes up with a solution that will allow the flight to leave. He tells the airline that he will use the auxiliary power unit throughout the flight as a substitute for the malfunctioning main generator.
Okay, I want you to write this in the logbook. Released for flight with APU generator operative. We'll use the APU to power the left side AC system. APU is coming on. Beta lights off.
Your power.
During his inspection of the APU, Heimdall makes an important discovery.
When I saw the part, I saw that it was not an aircraft standard part at all. It was made in a very primitive way by a piece of iron and welding it together in a substandard way.
He notices that one of the mounts attaching the APU to the plane is broken. The unit contains a rapidly spinning turbine that generates electricity. If it wasn't properly held in place, it could have caused this crash. Investigators need to know if the broken APU caused the crash. They'll soon discover that it's just a piece of a much more troubling puzzle. Investigators have discovered that Partnair Flight 394 was flying with a broken APU mount. Metallurgist Terry Heaslip performs extensive testing on the failed part.
My initial reaction was that the welding was bad, was probably inappropriate.
Heaslip wants to know when the strut broke. If it happened during the plane's last flight, it could explain the accident.
I could see the impact markings and the progression markings on it that showed that it did not fail in a single overload during this last accident flight.
The way the broken mount is worn down also tells Heaslip that the mount holding the APU in place didn't break on the day of the accident. It was broken long before Flight 394 took off. Investigators now need to know what effect the broken mount had on the flight.
40,000 RPMs. Did a lot of damage.
The APU is a large gyroscope having a tremendous amount of energy in it when it's rotating. And if that energy is transmitted to the surroundings, the fuselage, the structure, it could impact the whole vibration pattern in the tail.
Investigators want to know if anyone had felt vibrations on this particular plane. Interviews with people who flew on it provide some answers.
Listen, we appreciate your coming in. Thanks a lot. Now, you said you felt some rumbling on the plane, is that right?
One person stated that the plane that crashed vibrated far more than the two other Convairs owned by the company.
Did anything seem unusual on the plane?
But others failed to mention the vibrations.
Had a good flight.
It's a puzzling situation. Investigators know the APU mount was broken before the flight, but they still don't know if it even played a role in the crash, or whether it would have affected the plane's tail. Then the reconstruction begins to clear things up. Heimdall discovers that two doors from the plane's tail have not been found.
When we reassembled the parts from the tail, we saw that the rudder had been torn apart in two major pieces, and some parts were missing. In particular, the doors between the fin and the rudder were missing.
The shroud doors are two small doors located on the vertical fin of the plane. They provide mechanics with access to weights inside the fin that control the rudder's movement. Heimdall makes a dramatic find about the doors themselves. They were constructed with an aluminium honeycomb liner. From his days in the Air Force, Heimdall knows they have a unique property.
This is thin aluminum foil, as you know, and it has the good reflective properties for radar, and it's very light. The military use it to disturb radar signals, call it chaff.
Investigators now realize that the unidentified object picked up by Swedish radar was probably a piece of one of the shroud doors.
But when we connected the missing doors and honeycomb with the radar data, we knew that it had happened up at cruising altitude, because the slow-falling object had come from very high level, cruising altitude practically.
Investigators conclude that the tail began to break apart at 22,000 feet before it plummeted from the sky. But why had the doors fallen off in mid-flight? Whatever caused the shroud doors to tear off likely caused the crash. Investigators know that the rudder's counterweights are located just inside the shroud doors. If a rudder moves too violently from side to side, the weights do as well.
We found enough pieces to show that it was just pounding these doors. And the first real components that came off were the honeycomb in those doors.
Investigators conclude that around the time of the accident, something caused the rudder to swing violently back and forth, but they still don't know what.
The APU with the broken front shock mount on its own, running in flight, would not cause the aircraft to come apart and the tail to come apart. There had to be extra factors there for that to occur.
Investigators continue searching for those extra factors. Then Partner Airlines proposes one. They point to the F-16 that passed over the plane just minutes before the plane veered off course.
Whoa, look at that, 11 o'clock. F-16.
Partner claims the military jet was flying faster than it should have been. They also believe that it came much closer to the flight than officially reported.
Partner, they contacted the Swedish investigator, and he came out with the answer that the F-16 could probably have gone through the sound barrier as it passed just over the partner plane.